Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. The United States of America has a long history of Republican governance going all the way back to its founding. And so, to us today, the idea of any kind of monarchy existing in America seems completely ridiculous. But that didn't stop one man from trying and, more or less, actually succeeding. Meet King James Strang, the self-proclaimed King of Beaver Island, Michigan, and join me as we regale the ridiculous tale of his reign of terror in Lake Michigan. James Jesse Strang was born on March 21st, 1813 in Scipio, New York, and right away, even in his early years, you could already see what kind of delusions this dude had about himself. He wrote in a diary, which he kept in a secret code, that he thought that God had called him to be one of the historical greats on the same level as Napoleon and Julius Caesar, and was disappointed in himself that he hadn't become a general by age 19. Anyways, Strang was raised in a Baptist home, ended up becoming a lawyer, and eventually went on to become a Baptist minister. But, in 1844, any hope for a normal life for Jimmy Strang would be completely destroyed. After moving to a Mormon town in Wisconsin, he would end up converting to Mormonism, becoming quick friends with Joseph Smith, who would end up baptizing him personally, and then died 4 months later. Joseph Smith ended up being assassinated on June 27, 1844, without naming a direct successor, which led to a succession crisis with numerous different people claiming leadership. And Strang decided to jump in on this and said, "Hey dudes, Joseph Smith totally left this totally not forged letter to me before he died saying that he wants me to be in charge, and an angel came down to me and said that I should be in charge. Totally." And though most Mormons dismissed him in favor of Brigham Young, he actually managed to attract about 12,000 Mormons to his side. After being driven out of Wisconsin, he would end up fleeing to an island in Lake Michigan known as Beaver Island. The Mormons coming into Beaver Island would establish the township of St. James, named after the glorious leader, who, on July 8th, 1850, would end up proclaiming himself as king, holding an elaborate coronation ceremony and everything, being crowned with a crown made of tin. And so emerged King James Strang and his reign of terror. Now, Beaver Island wasn't exactly uninhabited when the Mormons flooded into the place. There was already a sizable population of Irish Catholics who weren't super fond of Strang and his band of Mormons. And although Strang technically never claimed dominion over any territory, as the Mormons came to dominate the island, Strang would end up being established as the de facto king of Beaver Island. And as Strang grew in power, he would end up enforcing his authority over not just his own followers, but over the entirety of the island, including the so-called Gentiles, meaning non-Mormons. Strang even went so far as to force non-Mormons to pay tithes to his church and demand that any non-Mormons landing on Beaver Island be baptized into his church or be forced out. Now, the non-Mormons on Beaver Island and the surrounding islands realized, yo, dudes, we need to do something about Strang. This is ridiculous. And so many of the Irish Catholics on the island began to fight back against Strang. And in one instance, in 1850, just a couple days before his coronation, a group of Irish Catholics formed a private army to go into St. James and expel the Mormons before being confronted in the Battle of Whiskey Point in which Strang fired a cannon at them and forced them out of St. James. And it wasn't even the Irish Catholics on the island that Strang's regime was terrorizing. In part of their conflicts with the so-called Gentiles, many Mormons under Strang would end up forming pirate bands, terrorizing Lake Michigan through piracy and shipwrecking, with some accounts even claiming that they kidnapped young women whom they forced into forced marriages. And some of those pirates would go even further, launching raids on numerous settlements across the Great Lakes, committing armed robberies, home invasions, and horse theft in Michigan, Wisconsin, and even all the way into Ohio. Now, Strang denied these claims, saying that they were all just fueled by anti-Mormon bigotry, but there are enough documentations to prove that this kind of nonsense was indeed occurring. Now, at this point, Strang's shenanigans were starting to catch the eye of the US federal government, who was starting to wonder why the heck there were Mormon pirates in Lake Michigan stealing horses. And as Strang asserted himself as an absolute monarch over the island, Strang was accused of treason, with President Fillmore ordering the district attorney to look into what the heck was going on. He was then sent to stand trial in Detroit, and somehow won, retaining his control over the island. And riding off all the good press that this victory gave him, he would end up being unanimously elected to the Michigan House of Representatives in 1853. Now, the House had to decide, do we really want to let this guy in? But they allowed it, as King Strang would end up serving as a Democrat in the Michigan House of Representatives until his untimely death. And believe it or not, Strang was actually surprisingly liberal in the state house, championing things such as the temperance movement against alcohol. But of course, all weird things must come to an end, including King Strang's rule in Beaver Island. Back home on Beaver Island, Strang had begun to make numerous enemies, not just outside of his church, but even within, as enemies began plotting his downfall. This first made itself apparent through Strang's support for polygamy. Early on, Strang had been a strong advocate for monogamy within the Mormon Church, which is one of the main reasons why so many people came to follow him in the first place, seeing him as a monogamous alternative to the polygamy of Brigham Young's church. However, in 1849, the married Strang had an affair with a 17-year-old girl, after which he had a revelation from God that he was now to support polygamy. And since many of his followers came to him for the exact opposite, many people, even in his own church, began to dislike him. And then, as a theocratic absolute monarch, Strang also began to tyrannically enforce his church's teachings, enforcing harsh punishments on those who violated their moral code. And in one instance, after 2 women in his church refused to wear bloomers instead of dresses, Strang had their husbands flogged, after which they both vowed revenge against Strang and made threats against him. Strang heard these threats and said, "Yeah, I'd like to see you try," before being shot 3 times, with the assassins escaping to a nearby island. And then, Strang ended up being sent back to Wisconsin, where he would then die of infection on July 9th, 1856, along with his reign of terror over Beaver Island. After his downfall, the Irish Catholics would launch an attack, retaking the island and kicking the Mormons out once and for all, most of whom fleeing to Salt Lake City. Strang's rule as a theocratic absolute monarch over Beaver Island is easily one of the strangest chapters in American history. The fact that some whack job managed to establish himself as a king in America and actually managed to, for a time, succeed is evidence that sometimes truth truly is stranger than fiction. And so, Strang remains, for better or for worse, the only king in American history. I want to thank everyone who's been kind enough to donate to me over on Patreon. And if you want to get exclusive access to merch, early access to videos, or just want to support the channel, make sure to check out the Patreon with the link in the description. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. So that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.